Imagine a global conflict that spanned 6 years, involved over 30 countries, and resulted in the death of an estimated 70 to 85 million people. That was World War II, a cataclysmic event that forever shaped the 20th century. Its vast scale and profound impact still echo in our world today. This was a war fought on land, at sea, and in the air, touching every corner of the globe. So fasten your seatbelts as we dive into the history of World War II. The seeds of World War II were sown in the rise of dictatorships. As the world grappled with the fallout of the Great War and the Great Depression, a wave of authoritarian regimes swept across the globe. In Germany, Adolf Hitler rose to power, using a potent cocktail of nationalism, racism, and economic promises to win the support of a disillusioned populace. His Nazi Party, once a fringe group, became the dominant political force, and with Hitler as chancellor, Germany began to rearm and expand in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Meanwhile, in Italy, Benito Mussolini established a fascist regime that championed an aggressive nationalism and a centralized authoritarian government. Mussolini's Italy, like Hitler's Germany, sought to expand its borders and influence, setting its sights on places like Ethiopia in Africa. Across the globe in the East, Japan was also undergoing radical changes. Its military, growing ever more powerful, began a campaign of territorial expansion, invading Manchuria and later the rest of China. This militaristic expansion was driven by a desire for resources, economic security, and a vision of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere under Japanese leadership. These aggressive and expansionist regimes, Hitler's Germany, Mussolini's Italy, and Imperial Japan, each fueled by a toxic brew of militarism, nationalism, and authoritarianism, set the world on a path to war. If left unchecked, they would plunge the world into a conflict unparalleled in its devastation and scope. The fuse was lit with Germany's invasion of Poland. In the early hours of September 1, 1939, Hitler's forces stormed across the Polish border, marking the beginning of World War II. With unparalleled speed and ferocity, a strategy coined as Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, the German forces swiftly overwhelmed Poland's defenses. The world watched in disbelief as the German war machine rolled on, seemingly unstoppable. It was a brutal demonstration of Hitler's ambition and the destructive power of his military. The invasion of Poland was not just an act of aggression, but a blatant defiance of the international agreements Germany had signed. The global community couldn't stand idly by. Britain and France, as guarantors of Poland's independence, had no choice but to respond. On September 3rd, they declared war on Germany. Yet, despite this declaration, there was little immediate action on the Western Front. This period of apparent inactivity, characterized by limited military operations despite the state of war, came to be known as the Phony War. But make no mistake, the gears of war were turning. Troops were mobilizing, alliances were forming, and strategies were being crafted. The world held its breath, bracing itself for the storm that was about to break. It was the calm before the tempest, the stillness before the onslaught. The world was now engulfed in war. The skies of Britain became a battlefield. This marked the onset of a crucial chapter in World War II, the Battle of Britain. In the summer of 1940, the German Luftwaffe launched an ambitious air campaign against the United Kingdom. Their objective was clear: to gain air superiority and pave the way for a possible land invasion. This blitzkrieg from the sky aimed to cripple Britain's Royal Air Force and demoralize the British people. Day after day, night after night, German bombers and fighters crossed the English Channel, raining down bombs on British cities, airfields, and industries. London, the heart of Britain, bore the brunt of these attacks in what came to be known as the Blitz. The city was set ablaze, its landmarks reduced to rubble. The relentless bombing raids made a mockery of the city's skyline, replacing the familiar with the catastrophic. But the British were not to be cowed. With a spirit captured in Winston Churchill's stirring speeches, they fought back. The Royal Air Force, though outnumbered, resisted the German onslaught with grit and determination. Their Spitfires and Hurricanes became symbols of defiance, darting through the smoke-filled skies, repelling the invaders. The Battle of Britain was more than a military confrontation. It was a battle of wills, a test of national resilience. The British people, united in their defiance, demonstrated extraordinary courage and resolve in the face of adversity. Despite the onslaught, Britain stood firm. The war in Europe intensified with Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union. In June of 1941, Hitler broke the non-aggression pact he had signed with Stalin 2 years earlier. The Eastern Front, as it came to be known, was one of the deadliest theaters of the war. Here, the Germans and the Soviets clashed in a grueling conflict marked by extreme brutality and disregard for military and civilian casualties. Meanwhile, Hitler's forces continued their relentless march across Europe. Country after country fell to the ruthless efficiency of the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces. From the fjords of Norway to the sunny climes of Greece, from the windswept plains of Poland to the romantic streets of Paris, the Nazi regime spread its dark shadow. Nazi occupation varied from region to region, but it was universally oppressive. The Nazis imposed their ideology, suppressed local cultures, exploited resources, and committed horrific atrocities. Jews, Romani people, Poles, and many other groups were systematically persecuted and murdered in what would later be known as the Holocaust. In spite of this, resistance movements sprang up across the continent. In forests and cities, in the day's light and the night's shadow, ordinary men and women took extraordinary risks to defy their oppressors and keep hope alive. Europe was in the grip of the Axis powers, yet, unbeknownst to them, the tide of war was about to turn. A surprise attack drew the United States into the conflict. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Japan launched a daring assault on Pearl Harbor. This attack, executed without a formal declaration of war, left a significant portion of the American Pacific Fleet in ruins. The following day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the nation, describing the event as a date which will live in infamy. Swiftly, Congress declared war on Japan, and 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. This marked America's official entry into World War II. The once neutral nation transformed into a significant force in the global conflict, focusing on two fronts, Europe and the Pacific. The war that had been raging for over 2 years had now pulled in the United States, changing the course of the conflict significantly. The war had truly become a world war. The tide of the war began to turn with the Normandy landings. On June 6, 1944, a date now etched in history as D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history was launched. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in France, facing fierce resistance from German defenders. This monumental operation marked the beginning of the end for the Axis powers in Europe. The Allies, comprising of forces from the United States, Britain, Canada, and other nations, faced a daunting task. But their courage and determination shone through as they pushed forward, gradually liberating occupied territories. Following the successful invasion, the Allies advanced across France, liberating Paris in August. As they moved into Germany, they uncovered the full horrors of the Holocaust, the systematic genocide perpetrated by the Nazis. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union was making significant gains, pushing the Germans back and reclaiming their lost territories. By early 1945, both the Western and Eastern fronts were closing in on Germany. In May of 1945, Germany unconditionally surrendered, marking the end of the war in Europe. The once fearsome Nazi war machine had been defeated. The Allies had paid a heavy price, but their sacrifice had not been in vain. The world had been saved from the tyranny of Nazi rule. The Allies had won the war in Europe. But the war was not over yet. The Pacific War was still raging, with the Allies and Japan locked in a deadly struggle. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa were fierce and bloody, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. These were some of the most brutal conflicts in the Pacific, with the Allies slowly but surely gaining ground. As the Allies advanced, they faced a difficult decision. An invasion of mainland Japan would likely result in a staggering number of casualties on both sides. So the United States made a decision that would forever change the course of history. They dropped 2 atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation was unimaginable. In an instant, tens of thousands of people lost their lives, and countless others would suffer the effects of radiation poisoning for years to come. The atomic bombings brought the reality of war home to the Japanese in a way that nothing else could. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. The announcement was met with a mix of relief and disbelief by the Japanese people. The surrender marked the end of World War II, a conflict that had engulfed the globe for 6 years. Finally, after 6 long years, the world was at peace. World War II was a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation. It began with the rise of dictators and culminated in a global struggle that shaped the course of history. From the Blitz to the Battle of Iwo Jima, from the Eastern Front to the Pacific Theater, the war left a profound and lasting impact. The final defeat of Germany and Japan's surrender marked the end of an era, a war that changed the world and whose lessons we must never forget.